"Hey, Blackie, go serve!" The words sliced through the grand ballroom like a whip, sharp enough to silence the string quartet mid-note. 100 crystal glasses trembled in frozen hands as laughter rolled out from the center table. A blonde woman in a midnight blue gown pointed her manicured finger toward the young black woman standing near the edge of the crowd. Her voice wasn't quiet. It was loud enough to brand her target in front of every tuxedo and diamond necklace in the room. That young woman's name was Maya Johnson. To them, she was invisible until she became their punchline. The chandeliers above rained light onto her skin, not soft but harsh, turning her calm expression into an accidental spotlight. Around her, couples in satin dresses and black ties smirked. A man in a tailored tux clapped his friend on the shoulder, whispering, "Thought she was staff. The laughter wasn't private." It echoed. It grew. It became a wave meant to drown her dignity. But Maya didn't flinch. One hand rested lightly at her side, the other raised a phone to her ear. Her posture said restraint, not weakness. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Maya. The blonde woman wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her pearl earrings swaying with every cruel syllable. "Darling, pass me a glass, or did they not train you to serve properly?" The table erupted again, laughter bouncing against marble walls, cracking like ice under pressure. In that laughter, Maya heard history. At 16, she'd been turned away from a boutique store because the clerk assumed she couldn't afford what was inside. At 24, she was told a penthouse suite wasn't meant for people like her. And now, decades later, inside this billion-dollar ballroom, the script hadn't changed, only the chandeliers were brighter. Across the room, not everyone joined in. A junior associate at the far end of the table, notebook still open, froze mid-scribble. His eyes shifted between Maya and the laughing heirs. He wasn't sure whether to intervene or stay silent, but his pen shook. Silence has weight. Tonight, it was heavy. Maya's phone pressed closer to her ear. Her voice, low but deliberate, carried through the noise like steel under velvet. "Yes, it's me. Cancel the $900 million deal." The laughter dimmed, not because they understood, but because the tone in her voice did not match the picture they painted of her. Calm, final, commanding. And in that moment, the air in the ballroom wasn't light anymore. It was charged. Maya Johnson hadn't come to the gala for champagne or chandeliers. She came for one reason: to witness a $900 million contract fall into place, or collapse. Tonight was never about appearances, it was about exposure. The irony was sharp. They saw her as staff, yet she was the deal's majority shareholder, seated quietly at the edge of a gilded empire. She chose a pale dress, simple, unbranded, deliberate. No designer label to broadcast her worth. No glittering necklace to distract from her silence. Just presence. That was the real test. Across the ballroom, the billionaire white family dominated the floor like royalty. Faces she had seen in magazines, people who had built their power through legacy, not merit. Their laughter was loud, their confidence louder. They believed this space was theirs alone. One of the sons, broad-shouldered in a tailored tux, squinted at Maya as if inspecting an intruder. "Who let her in here?" His voice wasn't a whisper. He wanted everyone to hear. He tapped his glass for effect, drawing more eyes toward her. A ripple of curiosity spread through the guests. Some tilted their heads, some smirked, some simply stared, complicit in silence. Maya remained still. She lifted her chin slightly, eyes calm, letting the storm swirl around her. The blonde matriarch leaned back in her chair, swirling champagne. "Darling, did you sneak past security? This isn't the servant's wing." Her laughter came quick, sharp, meant to sting. Around her, friends giggled on cue, as if prejudice had been rehearsed, but not everyone laughed. Near the corner, a young associate in a gray suit froze mid-step, tray still in hand. He wasn't staff. He was legal counsel, junior but attentive. His pen had recorded every clause of the pending deal. Now it was recording something else, an unspoken record of bias. He glanced toward Maya, then toward the family, caught in the tension of choice. Stay silent or bear witness. Maya adjusted her grip on the phone, but she didn't dial again. Not yet. Timing mattered more than retaliation. The eldest son leaned forward, his cufflinks catching the chandelier light. "A $1 billion contract? With her? Please. We don't build legacies with pretenders." He spat the last word like poison. The word hung in the air. Pretender. Maya's lips parted slightly, not in anger, but in memory. She remembered 23, walking into her first bank to cash a commission check. The teller raised an eyebrow, said the account must be stolen. Pretender. She remembered 31, denied a business loan despite offering collateral triple the requirement. Pretender. And now, here in this ballroom, the insult returned, dressed in black tie. The crowd chuckled again, uneasy but entertained. The matriarch tapped her glass. "Champagne for the real guests, darling. Leave the silver tray for someone else." Maya exhaled once, quiet, steady. The test wasn't over, but soon the grading would begin. The laughter didn't fade, it multiplied. Every cruel syllable became entertainment for the ballroom. Glasses clinked. Conversations hushed just enough for the spectacle to continue. The eldest son rose halfway from his chair, raising a golden flute in mock salute. "Here's to keeping pretenders out of boardrooms," he said. The toast wasn't about champagne. It was about humiliation. Guests chuckled, some nervously, others gleefully, as if his words carried authority. Maya remained seated. Stillness can be louder than protest. Her silence unsettled them more than any outburst could. The matriarch leaned forward, pearls resting against her collarbone like armor. "Sweetheart, if you want to be seen here, bring us more champagne, that's all you're good for." Her hand extended lazily, the way one might summon a servant. A hush rippled. Even among cruelty, some recognized the line had been crossed. A woman at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably, lowering her eyes. The young legal associate clenched his jaw, pen digging into paper, documenting word for word. The second son, younger but sharper, snatched the flute from Maya's hand before she could place it back on the table. "Careful," he sneered. "Wouldn't want you breaking something you can't afford." He wagged the glass like a trophy, then set it back down with exaggerated flourish. Gasps flickered across the crowd. Some guests looked away, others leaned in closer. Tension spread like a crack across marble. Maya didn't move. She breathed once, steady. Inside, memory clawed at her. Age 16, escorted out of a hotel lobby because guests don't look like you. Age 24, called high risk, though she carried more collateral than anyone else in the room. And now, decades later, mocked in front of a chandeliered empire she partly owned. Her hand drifted again toward her phone, thumb grazing the screen. But she waited. Every insult was another brick in their downfall. She would let them build their own cage. The matriarch laughed louder, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you really think billions move through people who dress like that? Be serious." The eldest son smirked, tossing his cufflinks into the light. "Let's end this charade. No $1 billion family does business with her." The word wasn't just dismissal, it was reduction. The ballroom air thickened. Whispers circled like smoke. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "She doesn't belong," another echoed. But at the far end, the young associate finally set down his pen. His voice didn't rise above the music, but his words mattered. "I saw her name on the contract. She belongs here." It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was the first crack in the family's wall of arrogance. Maya straightened slightly in her chair, eyes sharp, breath calm. The storm was nearly ready. Maya didn't rise to their bait. She sat as if anchored to the velvet chair, posture steady, gaze unbroken. Around her, the laughter still rippled, though less unanimous, now thinner, strained, like a performance losing its rhythm. The matriarch lifted her glass again. "See? She won't even defend herself. Silence speaks volumes." But they misread it. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The young associate Ethan Clark, 28, junior counsel, watched from the far end of the table. His fingers trembled over his notes, but his eyes stayed locked on Maya. He saw what others missed. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was pressure, like a storm waiting for the right strike. He hesitated, then leaned toward his neighbor, whispering, "She's on the contract. I checked this morning." The neighbor, a financier twice his age, glanced at him sharply but said nothing. Silence again, but a silence of complicity, not power. A waiter brushed past, tray rattling slightly as he caught fragments of the family's laughter. His jaw tightened. He, too, heard the venom dressed as humor. He, too, knew something was wrong. But he kept walking, because service staff never had the luxury of protest. Maya's fingers grazed her phone once more. She wasn't dialing. Not yet. She was measuring. Every insult was being logged, if not by her device, then by the witnesses who couldn't look away. The eldest son smirked, leaning closer across the polished oak table. "What's the matter? No comeback? Or do they teach obedience where you come from?" His tone dripped with arrogance, as if cruelty was inherited wealth. Maya blinked slowly, her lips barely parting. Words reveal more about the speaker than the target. Her voice was quiet, deliberate, like steel wrapped in velvet. The room shifted. Some guests exhaled sharply, as if surprised she'd spoken at all. Others frowned, the joke souring in their mouths. The matriarch scoffed. "Cryptic lines don't make you belong here, darling. This is a billion-dollar table, not a poetry slam." But the young associate's pen had stopped shaking. He wrote one line across his notes, underlined twice. "She belongs more than they know." At the edge of the ballroom, the music faltered. The quartet, sensing the unease, softened their strings until the melody dissolved into silence. Now the only sound was the family's arrogance against Maya's composure, and composure, in that room, carried more weight than champagne or legacy. The ballroom no longer hummed with effortless luxury. It buzzed with unease. Laughter had stretched too long, grown too sharp, and now it scraped against the marble walls instead of filling them. At the far end of the table, Ethan Clark set down his pen for good. He looked at Maya, then at the family, and then back again. His chest tightened. He had prepared legal notes, not moral ones. But here they were both colliding under the chandelier. "She belongs here," he whispered again, this time louder. A woman beside him caught the words, her eyes widening. She wasn't a lawyer, but she knew enough. Whispers have power when silence has failed. Near the bar, a guest in a dark blazer shifted his phone discreetly. The red light blinked, recording. He hadn't planned to, but injustice has a way of forcing hands. A ripple went through the nearby crowd as others noticed. Some frowned, some nodded, some lifted their own devices. The matriarch noticed, too. Her smile tightened. "Put those phones away," she ordered, voice sharp enough to pierce the room. "This is private business." But the order came too late. Once one camera rises, others follow. Maya's eyes met the man filming, calm, steady, unshaken. "Not yet," she said softly. Her words carried farther than expected. The man hesitated, then lowered his phone. The eldest son chuckled at the gesture. "See, even she knows this doesn't belong on record. Because it's all a game." Maya turned her head slowly, her gaze slicing across him. "Some truths don't need footage. They need witnesses." The young associate inhaled sharply. The line felt heavier than anything he had written all night. The matriarch scoffed, waving her hand. "Witnesses? Darling, these are our friends. Do you really think they'll side with you over us?" But not all friends stay loyal when dignity is trampled. At a side table, a woman in emerald silk finally stood. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "She's not the problem here, you are." Gasps rolled like a tide. The balance in the room shifted, not enough to topple the family, but enough to make them glance at each other. Their laughter didn't sound the same anymore. Maya sat quietly, her hands folded, her silence still intact. She didn't need to spark the fire. It had already begun, lit by those who could no longer look away. The shift in the room rattled the family more than they admitted. For the first time that evening, their laughter didn't echo, it cracked. But arrogance rarely surrenders. It doubles down. The eldest son shoved back his chair, wood scraping against marble like a warning. He stood tall, chin raised, voice pitched to carry across the entire ballroom. "Enough of this charade. Security, remove her." The word remove landed like a gavel. Heads turned. Whispers surged. Two men in black suits, discreet until now, stepped from the edges of the hall. Their earpieces glinted under chandelier light. They moved with rehearsed confidence, as if this wasn't the first time someone unwanted had been escorted away from this world of glass and gold. The matriarch smirked, swirling her champagne. "Darling, you brought this on yourself. Pretenders don't get seats at billion-dollar tables." Her words were sugar-coated poison, meant for the crowd as much as for Maya. Maya didn't move. Her chair remained anchored, her posture unbroken. She looked at the approaching guards as if they were an inconvenience, not a threat. Calm, deliberate, silent. The second son grinned wide, tapping his cufflinks. See? She's too stunned to speak. That's what happens when frauds get caught. But the crowd's mood had shifted. The woman in emerald silk crossed her arms, her voice sharp. Caught doing what? Sitting quietly? Her defiance hung in the air. Others began nodding. The witnesses were multiplying. Ethan Clark, the young associate, finally spoke louder, pen still in hand. Her name is on the contract. I saw it myself. The matriarch's smile faltered. You don't know what you saw. I know exactly what I saw, he countered, louder now. His voice trembled, but it carried. The guards stopped mid-step, hesitation breaking their routine. They looked from Maya to the family, then to the murmuring crowd. Authority suddenly felt less certain. Maya finally lifted her phone from the table. One smooth motion, one quiet breath. Her lips parted just enough. Proceed. The word was soft, but the weight was crushing. The eldest son frowned. Proceed with what? But Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. The room was no longer theirs to control. The ballroom's tension was already strung tight as a violin string. One more pull and it would snap. The eldest son didn't wait for security. He snatched the contract packet from the table, a thick, leather-bound folder embossed with gold. The same packet Maya had quietly carried earlier, containing signatures, clauses, $900 million in play. With one motion, he tore the first page down the middle. The sound was violent, louder than the quartet's strings had ever been. Paper split like fabric under strain. Gasps shot through the hall. Frauds don't sign billion-dollar deals, he sneered, scattering the torn halves across the table. The fragments fluttered like confetti, but there was no celebration in them, only insult. The matriarch clapped slowly, her pearls catching the chandelier's light. Finally, someone cleaned this up. She doesn't belong at our table. The second son leaned back in his chair, smirking. Next time, come dressed to serve, not to pretend. Silence crashed heavier than laughter ever had. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably, their orders suddenly feeling dirty in their hands. At a nearby table, a guest muttered under his breath, "That's theft." Another answered, louder this time, "That's humiliation." Phones were raised again, not hidden now, but defiantly high, their red lights glowing like warning signals. Ethan Clark's pen snapped in his grip. He had taken notes all evening, but there was no need anymore. The evidence was already everywhere on the floor, in the air, on every recording device now aimed at the family. Maya sat motionless, her eyes tracking the fluttering pieces of paper as they drifted onto the marble floor. Her breath was calm, steady, unshaken. The eldest son leaned closer, his voice a hiss meant only for her but loud enough to leak. "Get out, before we drag you out." It was the breaking point. The insult wasn't just words now, it was destruction. A deal torn apart in arrogance. A reputation mocked in public. But Maya didn't rise. She didn't flinch. She let the weight of their cruelty hang in the air, heavier with each second of silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Guests who had wavered now stood straighter. Phones tilted higher. The tide was turning, and the family didn't see it yet. Maya's hand hovered over her phone again, her lips parted. One word, when spoken, would not just answer the insult, it would end it. The ballroom floor was littered with torn contract pages, fragments of $900 million fluttering like ash after a fire. The family believed they had ended something. In truth, they had only lit the fuse. Maya's phone was already in her hand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With the same calm she'd carried all night, she pressed one button, lifted the phone to her ear, and spoke two words. "Activate protocol." Endow. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they cracked through the hall like thunder. The eldest son scoffed. "Protocol? What is this theater?" He turned to the crowd, smiling as if her calm was comedy. "See? Pretenders love to pretend." But Maya wasn't pretending. On the other end, a voice responded instantly, firm, precise. "Protocol confirmed. Logging all events. Initiating termination sequence." Guests nearby froze. The tone wasn't casual. It wasn't performative. It was corporate. Legal. Final. The matriarch leaned forward, her pearls rattling against her glass. "Darling, who do you think you're fooling? You don't have the power to terminate anything." But already, murmurs rolled through the crowd. Some recognized the cadence of the voice on the line. Some recognized the phrase, termination sequence. It wasn't a bluff. It was business. Maya lowered the phone slightly, her gaze sweeping the room. You tore paper, but I control the deal. Her voice was steady, cutting. Ethan Clark felt his breath catch. His earlier whispers were no longer whispers, they were truth in motion. He scribbled furiously, not because he doubted, but because he knew history was writing itself in front of him. The eldest son slammed his fist against the table, rattling the crystal. Security! Why are you still standing there? Remove her now! The guards hesitated again. Phones were raised everywhere now. Guests weren't just watching, they were documenting. Removing her meant becoming part of the record. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. He didn't move. The matriarch's laughter faltered, thinner this time. Empty threats don't erase torn contracts, sweetheart. Maya's lips curved, not into a smile but into something sharper. Empty threats don't cancel 900 million, but real authority does. And with that, she lifted the phone back to her ear. Proceed to cancellation. Effective immediately. The room fell silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. They thought they'd humiliated her. Instead, she had just ended their empire's biggest deal with a whisper. The silence after her words was heavier than the crystal chandeliers above. The guards froze mid-step. The crowd of financiers and socialites sat rigid, champagne glasses hovering in the air like ornaments no one dared move. The matriarch broke first. Her voice was thin, brittle, almost a whisper. What cancellation? You don't have that authority. Maya finally rose from her chair. Her movements were unhurried, precise, every step echoing against the marble floor. She stopped at the head of the table, where the torn contract pages still lay like discarded confetti. She rested one hand lightly on the polished oak and looked each family member in the eye. You made a mistake, she said evenly. You assumed the power was in your name, your money, your legacy. It isn't. It never was. Gasps rippled through the hall. Phones tilted higher. The eldest son tried to laugh, but it caught in his throat. You're bluffing. You're nobody. Maya's gaze didn't waver. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a slim black folder, the kind used in boardrooms, not ballrooms. She opened it slowly, deliberately, and slid a document across the table. The family's crest glimmered faintly in the corner, stamped next to her name. Majority shareholder, controlling interest, 51%. Maya Johnson. The matriarch's hand twitched as if reaching for the paper, but she stopped short. The evidence glared too brightly under the chandelier. You tore up paper tonight, Maya continued, her voice low but razor-sharp. But those weren't the originals. The originals sit in servers you don't control, servers I own. Murmurs surged through the crowd. She's the one, a guest whispered. She controls the deal, another answered. The second son leaned forward, eyes wide, disbelief crumbling into fear. This isn't possible. Maya finally let a flicker of a smile touch her lips. Possible? It's already done. You mocked the owner of the very contract you begged to sign. And now, it's gone. Phones clicked. Cameras rolled. The tide had turned. Ethan Clark sat back, pen forgotten, his face pale with realization. He had been right all along. She didn't just belong, she commanded. The matriarch slumped against her chair, pearls trembling at her throat. For the first time all evening, her laughter was gone. Maya stood taller, her presence filling the hall. You thought silence meant weakness. It meant patience, and patience just ended your deal. The silence didn't last. It cracked like glass under too much weight. Whispers spread first, sharp and urgent. She owns it? 51%? Did you hear that? Phones tilted higher, capturing every angle, every tremor on the family's faces. The matriarch's porcelain composure shattered. Her hand gripped the tablecloth so tightly the stem of her glass tipped and spilled, champagne bleeding across the oak. This is a mistake, she stammered, eyes darting to the eldest son. But the son was pale, jaw clenched, fists shaking at his sides. The arrogance he carried minutes ago had drained, leaving only panic. He looked like a man cornered not by a rival, but by truth itself. The second son leaned back hard in his chair, chest rising and falling too fast. His cufflinks glinted, but their shine no longer screamed. Confidence they reflected sweat. She can't do this, he muttered, though his voice cracked, betraying doubt. Around them, the guests shifted. Some leaned in eagerly, hungry to witness the downfall. Others pulled out their phones with open defiance. no longer pretending to hide their recordings. One woman in emerald silk clapped once, slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed like a verdict. "That," she said, her voice cutting, "is power." A ripple of applause followed, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the ballroom. Guests who had watched silently, complicit minutes earlier, now chose sides. And their choice was loud. The matriarch slammed her palm on the table, the pearls at her neck rattling. "You don't understand what you've done." Maya's gaze didn't flinch. She let the applause wash over the room, her presence steady at its center. "No," she replied. "You don't understand who I've always been." The guards who had once approached to remove her now stepped back into the shadows. Authority had shifted. Orders no longer held weight. Cameras did. Witnesses did. Ethan Clark sat frozen, pen in hand, until finally he exhaled. His whispered notes had become public record, live on every phone in the room. The truth no longer needed ink, it was viral. The eldest son slammed the torn fragments of contract back onto the table, as if scraps could undo reality. But the gesture was pitiful, almost childish. The deal was gone, and everyone knew it. Applause rose higher. Cheers cut through the tension. In the middle of the storm, Maya stood calm, unshaken, as if she had expected every beat of this night. The family's empire hadn't collapsed in a boardroom. It had collapsed in their own ballroom by their own arrogance, under their own chandeliers. And the world had just witnessed it. The ballroom roared with applause, but beneath it, the family sat in ruin. Their empire hadn't crumbled in some boardroom months later, quietly, with lawyers filing paperwork. It had collapsed here, under chandeliers, in full view of strangers who would carry the story far beyond these walls. Maya let the applause swell, then lifted one hand slightly. It fell quiet again, the way a conductor halts an orchestra with a single gesture. She didn't need volume. Presence alone commanded the room. She looked directly at the matriarch. "You mocked me in a space I control. You tore up paper that was never yours to touch. Tonight isn't about contracts. It's about consequences." The eldest son surged forward, face flushed. "You can't just walk in here and undo everything. Do you know who we are?" Maya tilted her head, her voice sharp, deliberate. "Do you?" Her phone was still in her hand. With one tap, she put the call on speaker. A crisp voice filled the ballroom, echoing against the marble. "This is legal. The termination has been processed. The $900 million agreement is void. Funds retracted. Access revoked." Gasps sliced through the air. Some guests pressed hands to their mouths. Others leaned closer, as if they needed to hear it again to believe it. The matriarch's pearls shook against her collarbone. You can't." Maya cut her off. "I already did." The second son slammed a hand against the table, desperation leaking through his arrogance. "You'll regret this. You've destroyed months of work." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Destroyed?" She pointed at the torn papers scattered across the floor. "You destroyed it yourself when you mistook silence for submission." The applause threatened to rise again, but Maya lifted her hand, keeping the room quiet. This wasn't about cheering, this was about verdicts. Her voice carried like a gavel. "Effective immediately, your family is barred from all future negotiations with my firm. Your access to our network is revoked. Every door you thought you owned is now closed." Phones lit up across the room as messages and alerts pinged. Guests checked screens, watching the collapse happen in real time. Shares dropping, access codes disabled, emails cut off. The eldest son's phone buzzed violently on the table. He grabbed it, read the screen, and his face drained of color. They locked us out," he whispered. The matriarch's hand trembled as she reached for her own device. A red error flashed across her screen. "Access denied." Maya spoke again, her voice calm but final. "I don't need to raise my voice. I don't need to make a scene. Power doesn't shout. It acts." Ethan Clark felt his chest tighten. He'd taken notes on contracts for months, but never on justice. Tonight, he wrote only one line. Power doesn't shout. It acts. The matriarch's composure shattered completely. She stood, palms flat on the table, pearls trembling at her throat. "You've ruined us," she hissed. Maya leaned forward, her gaze unblinking. "Number, you ruined yourselves. I just made it official." Esno. The guards, who had once been ordered to remove her, now stepped back farther, almost respectfully, as if they too recognized the shift in ownership. They weren't protecting the family anymore. They were protecting the room from the family's collapse. A guest in emerald silk began clapping again, louder this time, joined quickly by others. Applause rose into cheers, sweeping through the hall like a tide. Phones captured every second, broadcasting the downfall in real time. The eldest son sank into his chair, head in his hands. The second son stared blankly at the torn pages, as if they might stitch themselves back together. The matriarch slumped, pearls now a weight she could barely carry. Maya straightened, her presence commanding the entire hall. This deal is dead, and with it, so is the illusion that you controlled it. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the witnesses who had stood with her. Tonight, the world saw what arrogance does when it goes unchecked, and they saw what dignity looks like when it doesn't bend. Cheers erupted again, louder, unstoppable. Maya let the sound carry, then delivered the final blow. From this moment forward, your name doesn't open doors, it closes them. That's my decision. That's the judgment. And with those words, the family's downfall was sealed not in secrecy, not in whispers, but in the eyes of every single person who had watched them mock the very woman who held their future. The applause didn't fade this time. It grew, rolling through the ballroom like a tide crashing against a brittle wall. Guests who had once stared in silence were now on their feet, phones lifted high, capturing history as it unfolded under chandeliers that no longer glittered with pride but with exposure. The billionaire family sat ruined in their own house. The matriarch's hands trembled around her pearls, clutching them like they might still buy her dignity. The eldest son slumped in his chair, cufflinks gleaming uselessly as his phone buzzed with alerts of revoked access and collapsing shares. The second son's lips moved soundlessly, whispering disbelief that no longer mattered. Maya Johnson stood at the center of it all, calm and immovable, the eye of the storm she had never needed to raise her voice to summon. She didn't gloat, she didn't shout. She simply existed in a power that no one could erase. She glanced at the torn papers scattered across the marble floor. $900 million reduced to scraps by arrogance. Yet, in her presence, those scraps weren't evidence of her loss, they were proof of their downfall. She turned to the witnesses, her voice carrying steady across the roar of the crowd. Remember this moment. They thought legacy was enough. They thought money was enough. But what exposes the truth isn't wealth. It's how you treat those you think can't fight back. The room hushed, hanging on every word. Maya paused, her gaze sweeping over the family one final time. You mocked me in your ballroom, at your table, in front of your friends, but the only thing you revealed tonight was yourselves. You showed the world that power without respect is nothing, and now, nothing is all you have left. The matriarch gasped, as if struck. The eldest son tried to rise, but his legs buckled, and he sank back down. The second son clenched his fists, but his silence betrayed the truth. The fight was already lost. Maya straightened, her phone still in hand. She tapped the screen once. "Confirm closure," she said calmly. The voice on the other end replied instantly, echoing for all to hear. "Closure confirmed. The $900 million deal is terminated. Documentation filed. Public release in progress." Gasps surged through the hall, followed by a thunder of applause so fierce it rattled the very chandeliers. Cameras flashed, recording the final strike that would echo across headlines by morning. Maya set the phone down on the table, her eyes never leaving the family. You thought silence was weakness, but silence was the trap, and arrogance walked right into it. She turned, her dress swaying lightly as she crossed the marble floor. Guests stepped aside instinctively, forming a path not out of fear but out of reverence. Some lowered their phones to clap with both hands. Others whispered her name like a vow. At the edge of the ballroom, she paused. The applause still thundered, but in that instant, her voice carried above it all low, steady, final. This wasn't about 900 million. It was about respect, and that's something you'll never buy. The doors opened before her, wide and unopposed. She walked through them without looking back, leaving behind a family crumbling under their own arrogance and a room full of witnesses who had just learned what real power looked like. And just like that, the story ended not with noise, not with rage, but with dignity sharp enough to cut an empire in half.